My name's Daniel Parker, and before I dive into this story, let me just say I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in a war with a homeowners association. I'm just a regular guy. I work a 9 to 5, I save my money, and I've always dreamed of building something I could truly call my own. A place where I wouldn't just live, but a place where I'd feel proud every time I pulled into the driveway. That dream finally seemed possible about 2 years ago when I inherited a small piece of land from my late uncle just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. The land wasn't anything fancy, about an acre, half covered in trees, but it was mine, and to me, it looked like possibility. I had been saving for years, every bonus check and overtime shift tucked away until I'd scraped together about $150,000. That was my dream home fund, and believe me, every single dollar felt like blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I worked with an architect, pored over design sketches, and finally landed on what I thought was perfect, a cozy, modern farmhouse. Big front porch, tall windows to let the sunlight in, and just enough space for when family came to visit. Nothing excessive, nothing loud, just mine. The first time I set foot on that dirt with the blueprints in my hand, I swear I could almost see it already standing there. I imagined sitting on that porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun burn away the morning mist. I was so excited I actually laughed out loud that day, standing alone in the mud. But here's the thing about dreams. They have a way of drawing out people who want to crush them. Not long after the foundation crew broke ground, I got a knock on my temporary trailer door. It was a woman in her late 50s, sharp haircut, pearl earrings, and the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. She introduced herself as Karen Mitchell, the president of the local HOA. I didn't even know my property was under an HOA. Turns out, because the land technically bordered a private neighborhood, the association claimed community jurisdiction. And Karen made it very clear that she didn't think my little farmhouse fit their vision. "Mr. Parker," she said, looking me up and down like she was inspecting a stain on her shirt, "we have strict environmental and architectural guidelines here. Your construction project raises a lot of red flags." I was caught off guard. Environmental guidelines? I'm not tearing down wetlands or anything. It's just 1 acre, and this is my land. She gave me that smile again. "We'll see about that. You should know the HOA has final say on what gets built in this community." Now let me tell you, I've dealt with difficult people before, but there was something about Karen's tone, so smug, so absolutely certain she held all the power, that made my stomach twist. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe she was just being overly cautious, maybe this was just paperwork nonsense that would sort itself out. But the very next week, things escalated. Karen showed up again, this time with another man, Richard, my closest neighbor. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He went straight to the point. "Daniel, why don't you just sell me this lot? You'd make a tidy profit, and you'd save yourself a lot of trouble." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "Sell it? No, Richard. This land means something to me. I'm building my home here." That's when his smile dropped. His eyes narrowed in a way that made my skin crawl. He didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away, leaving Karen standing there. And she leaned in close, lowering her voice. "You should have taken the offer. Now things are going to get complicated." I can't describe the chill that went down my spine when she said that. It was like a threat disguised as neighborly advice. And sure enough, complicated was an understatement. Within days, the HOA started flooding me with letters, claims that my construction was damaging the environment, complaints that my building materials weren't approved, notices demanding I halt work immediately until the board could review my project. At first, I thought it was just bureaucracy gone wild. But then one night I came back to the site and found spray paint scrawled across the foundation walls, words like "stop" and "no trespassing" in big red letters. My heart sunk. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. Someone didn't want me here. I remember standing in the dark with a flashlight, my hands trembling, looking at the vandalism on what was supposed to be my dream. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Because what happened next, well, let's just say things didn't just get complicated. They got downright dangerous. I thought the spray paint on my foundation was the lowest point. I mean, who vandalizes someone's dream home before it's even finished? But I was wrong. That was just the warm-up act. The very next morning, I called Karen, demanding to know what the HOA was playing at. Of course, she denied everything. "Mr. Parker," she said over the phone, her voice as sweet as poison, "the HOA does not condone vandalism. If you're suggesting we had something to do with it, I'd advise you to be very careful about making false accusations." That smug tone again. It made my blood boil. I decided right then that I wasn't going to let some self-appointed neighborhood queen bully me. So I pressed forward. I hired a cleanup crew, got the graffiti blasted off, and told my builders to keep going. But every day felt like a battle. One afternoon, the county inspector stopped by, looking confused as he waved a stack of papers in his hand. "Mr. Parker," he said, "we've had 3 separate complaints filed about your site: noise violations, improper disposal of waste, and rodent infestation." I almost laughed in his face. Rodents? Out here? The house isn't even built yet. He shrugged. "I have to check, sir. The HOA submitted formal complaints. If these add up, you could face fines." And just like that, it became clear Karen and Richard weren't just going to lean on me, they were going to bury me in red tape, one complaint at a time. That night, I sat in my car at the site long after the workers had left. The crickets were chirping, the air was thick with the smell of pine, and I just felt defeated. This was supposed to be the happiest chapter of my life, and instead, it felt like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. But then, things got worse. One evening, I pulled up to the lot and found Richard standing there at the edge of my property. His arms were crossed, and he had that same smug look I'd seen before. "You should have sold when you had the chance," he muttered. I stepped out of my truck, trying to keep calm. "This is my land, Richard. I'm not going anywhere." He smirked, then leaned in close enough for me to smell the bourbon on his breath. "You don't belong here. People like you never last." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a house. This was personal. The confrontation turned ugly. He shoved me in the chest, hard enough for me to stumble back. My instincts screamed at me to fight back, but I knew that was exactly what he wanted. So instead, I pulled out my phone and called 911. Within 15 minutes, a sheriff's deputy rolled up, lights flashing. Deputy Carson, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a no-nonsense face. He stepped out, listened to both of us, then sighed like this was just another headache in his day. "All right, gentlemen, let's cool it down. Mr. Parker, you've got the right to build on your land as long as you're following county code. Mr. Mitchell," he looked at Richard with narrowed eyes, "you've got no right putting your hands on him. If I get another call out here, someone's leaving in cuffs. Understood?" Richard grumbled something under his breath, but he backed off, retreating into the shadows of his property. I thought that would scare them into backing down, but in reality, it only seemed to embolden them. because not long after that night, I started noticing things going missing. First, it was lumber stacked near the foundation. Then, a box of tools vanished. And one morning, when my crew showed up, the power generator had been smashed with a hammer. Thousands of dollars in damage just like that. I filed police reports, but Deputy Carson warned me quietly one evening. "Look, Daniel, I'll be honest with you. Folks like Karen, they've got money, connections. It's not easy proving who did what, but I'll keep an eye on things." Hearing that, my stomach dropped. If even the sheriff's department felt tied up by this HOA, what chance did I have? But the worst part wasn't the damage. It was the feeling that I was constantly being watched. My crew said they saw Karen's car parked down the street for hours at a time, just sitting there, her eyes fixed on the site. Sometimes Richard would stand in his yard with binoculars, like some kind of hawk waiting for prey. And late at night, when I drove past, I could swear I saw movement in the trees, shadows slipping between the branches, like people were out there watching me. I barely slept. My dream was turning into paranoia, and the more I fought, it seemed like I was losing control. But here's the thing about me, I don't give up easy. I had put too much into this home, too much into this dream. If they wanted a fight, I was ready to give them one. And little did I know, the fight was about to escalate into something no one could ignore. Because the next time the police got involved, it wasn't just vandalism or arguments. It was something far, far more serious. By the time summer rolled around, I was living in a constant state of tension. Every time I pulled up to my lot, my heart would race. Was something stolen this time? Broken? Painted over? It felt like my dream home wasn't rising out of the ground, it was sinking deeper into a pit of sabotage and stress. But nothing could have prepared me for the night everything changed. It was a Friday evening. My crew had wrapped up early, and I decided to swing by the site to check on things before the weekend. The sun was setting, streaking the Georgia sky in shades of orange and purple. For once, the place looked peaceful. I parked my truck, walked over to the half-built frame of the house, and just stood there for a moment, breathing it in. For a split second, I remembered why I started all this. The smell of cut wood, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees. It almost felt normal again. But then, I smelled something else. Smoke. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor grilling, but then I saw it, a faint trail of gray curling up from the back of the lot. My stomach dropped. I ran toward it, and when I turned the corner, I froze. A pile of my lumber, worth thousands of dollars, was on fire. The flames crackled, spitting sparks into the night air. The heat hit my face, and panic surged through me. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and shouted at the dispatcher that someone had set fire to my property. I tried to drag a hose over from the water spigot, but by the time I got the water running, the flames were too high. My arm shook as I sprayed, coughing on the smoke, the smell of burning pine making my eyes water. Within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the night. Fire trucks roared up, lights flashing red against the trees. Firefighters swarmed the scene, and behind them came Deputy Carson's cruiser. I stood there, covered in sweat and ash, my heart pounding out of my chest. Carson walked up, his face grim as he looked at the blaze. "Jesus, Parker, this isn't vandalism anymore. This is arson." I nodded, my voice barely steady. "They're trying to scare me out. They want me gone." The deputy glanced over his shoulder, and that's when I saw them. Karen and Richard, standing on the sidewalk across the street, arms folded, watching like it was some kind of show. The fire cast an orange glow on their faces, and I'll never forget Karen's expression, that same smug little smile, like she was enjoying every second. Carson noticed too. He muttered, "Stay here," and walked over to them. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught bits and pieces. Karen's voice carried in the night air. "We were simply taking a walk. We had nothing to do with this." Richard chuckled. Maybe if Parker played by the rules, this wouldn't happen. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles cracked. I wanted to march over there, scream, call them out. But Carson raised a hand at me, silently warning me to stay put. The firefighters finally got the flames under control, leaving behind a smoldering heap of blackened wood. Thousands of dollars gone, just like that. My dream home, delayed again. Carson came back, his jaw tight. "I'm filing this as arson, but without proof, it'll be hard to pin it on anyone." He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Off the record, I'd bet my badge those two know exactly what happened." I shook my head, my throat dry. "So that's it? They get away with it?" "For now," he said, looking me dead in the eyes. "But keep documenting everything, every incident, every letter, every threat. We'll build a case." I nodded, but inside I felt crushed. It didn't matter how many times I cleaned up, repaired, or called the cops. They always seemed one step ahead, hiding behind technicalities and excuses. But yet, something shifted that night. Because the fire wasn't just an attack on my property, it was an attack on my dignity. And I realized standing there in the smoky ruin that I couldn't fight this war alone anymore. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I poured out everything: the harassment, the threats, the vandalism, the arson. And when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said words that gave me my first real sliver of hope. "Daniel, what they're doing isn't just harassment, it's abuse of power. If we can prove this, we can not only stop them, we can take the whole HOA down." I walked out of her office with a folder full of legal paperwork, and something I hadn't felt in weeks: determination. But the fight was far from over, because once Karen and Richard caught wind that I had brought in legal firepower, they doubled down harder than ever. And their next move? It was the most outrageous stunt I had ever seen an HOA pull in my life. Hiring that lawyer felt like taking back control. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting, I was fighting back. But Karen and Richard, they weren't about to roll over and let me win. No, they came back twice as hard. It started with letters, dozens of them. Certified mail, thick envelopes stuffed with HOA violation notices. They accused me of everything under the sun: unauthorized tree removal, soil erosion, even endangering wildlife habitats. Wildlife habitats on a piece of land that had been empty for 20 years. I sat at my kitchen table, tearing open envelope after envelope, my hands shaking. By the time I finished, I had a stack of papers so high it looked like a college textbook. I called my lawyer, furious. "Can they even do this?" She sighed. "They can send notices, yes. But here's the thing, Daniel. Most people fold under this kind of pressure. They hope you'll give up before it goes to court." "Well, I'm not giving up," I told her. But even as I said it, a tiny part of me wondered if I was lying to myself. And then came the smear campaign. One afternoon, I drove past the community bulletin board near the entrance, and my stomach dropped. There, stapled front and center, was a flyer with my name plastered in bold letters. "Warning! Daniel Parker's construction endangers our community." It went on to list all sorts of lies: how I was dumping chemicals into the soil, how I was building illegally, how I refused to cooperate with reasonable HOA guidelines. At the bottom was Karen's signature, as bold as her ego. Neighbors who used to wave at me stopped making eye contact. At the gas station, I overheard people whispering about that troublemaker trying to ruin the neighborhood. And then, one evening, as I was locking up at the site, Richard's wife walked over. Her voice was sharp, dripping with venom. "Do us all a favor, Daniel. Pack up and leave. Nobody wants you here. You're ruining this community." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. "I'm not ruining anything. I just want to build my home." She smirked. "Then you're about to learn what happens to people who go against Karen." It wasn't just threats anymore. It was isolation, intimidation. They wanted me to feel like the enemy in my own neighborhood. But here's the thing. The more they pushed, the more stubborn I became. So my lawyer and I started building our case. We gathered every letter, every complaint, every police report. Deputy Carson even agreed to testify about the harassment he'd witnessed firsthand. But just when I thought I had a fighting chance, Karen pulled her most outrageous stunt yet. I showed up at the lot one Monday morning, ready to meet with contractors, only to find a giant red stop work order nailed to the frame of my house. Bold letters screamed, "Stop construction halted by order of HOA." My heart sunk. This wasn't from the county. It wasn't a legal government order. It was printed on HOA letterhead, signed by Karen herself. My builders stood around confused. Boss, are we supposed to stop?" I ripped the notice down, crumpled it in my fist, and said, "No, keep working. She doesn't have the authority." But Karen wasn't done. Later that day, she marched onto my property with 2 HOA board members flanking her like bodyguards. She waved a binder in my face. "You are in violation of Article 7, Section 14, Subsection C of the Covenant Agreement. If you don't cease construction immediately, we will pursue maximum fines up to $500 a day." I laughed bitterly. "You're making this up as you go. You don't have the power to stop me." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see what the court thinks." And just like that, she filed a lawsuit. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with court papers spread out, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. Fines, lawsuits, smear campaigns, threats, vandalism, all because I wanted to build a home. But I wasn't alone anymore. My lawyer told me they overplayed their hand. A fake stop work order, that's intimidation. That's abuse of authority. Daniel, this could blow up in their faces. Her words gave me hope. But hope is fragile, and Karen wasn't finished yet. Because just when I thought I had her cornered legally, she made a move so bold, so reckless, it shocked even me. She called the police on me. I'll never forget the night the police showed up at my door. It was around 9:30 in the evening. I'd just sat down with a reheated plate of leftovers, finally starting to relax after another long day at the site, when headlights flashed through my window. A sharp knock followed, and my stomach immediately dropped. 2 deputies stood on my porch. One of them was Deputy Carson, but the other was a younger guy I hadn't seen before. His hand rested on his holster like he was ready for trouble. "Mr. Parker," Carson said, his voice firm. "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "You need to come outside. We've had a complaint filed against you." I blinked. A complaint? About what? That's when Karen's voice cut through the night. She was standing across the street with Richard, her arms folded, that smug little smirk plastered on her face. "She threatened me," she shouted. "He came onto my property and screamed that he'd burn my house down. I don't feel safe with him living here." My jaw dropped. "That's a lie. I never—" Carson raised his hand. Daniel, just relax. We're here to sort this out." But the younger deputy wasn't as calm. He eyed me like I was already guilty. "Sir, we've had multiple complaints about your behavior from the HOA. Harassment, trespassing, even verbal threats." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you kidding me? I'm the one who's been harassed. They burned my lumber pile. They vandalized my property. You've been out there, Carson. You've seen it." Carson nodded slightly, but he was careful. "We have reports, yes, but right now we need to get both sides of the story." Karen stepped closer, putting on a performance worthy of an Oscar. She actually wiped at imaginary tears. "Deputy, I'm terrified. Every time I see him, I feel unsafe. I think he's unstable. He shouldn't be allowed to build here." I swear my blood pressure hit the roof. "Unstable? I've done nothing but defend myself. You people are twisting this around." The young deputy pulled out a notepad. "Sir, calm down. If you continue raising your voice, we may have to take further action." I forced myself to breathe, to not let them push me over the edge, because that's what Karen wanted. She wanted me to snap, to lash out, so she could point her finger and say, "See, he's dangerous." Carson finally stepped in, his voice carrying a little more weight. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Daniel, no contact with the HOA board members outside of official channels. Karen, same goes for you. If either of you violates this, we'll pursue charges. Understood?" Karen sniffled and nodded like she'd just been rescued from a monster. Richard put an arm around her, glaring at me over her head. And just like that, I was the villain in my own story. The deputies left, but the damage was done. The whole neighborhood had seen the flashing lights. By morning, whispers were everywhere. Daniel Parker, the unstable troublemaker. Daniel Parker, the guy who threatened the HOA president. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. In their eyes, perception was reality. And Karen knew it. She doubled down on the smear campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was dangerous, unhinged, and a threat to the community. But here's the thing about lies. They leave cracks, and my lawyer knew exactly how to find them. She told me, "Daniel, if they want to drag this into court, let them, because once they're under oath, the truth won't be so easy to twist." And that was when we made a decision to stop playing defense. We filed a lawsuit of our own against the HOA. Harassment, defamation, abuse of authority. Every dirty trick Karen had pulled, every false complaint, every intimidation tactic, we laid it all out. And the moment that lawsuit hit her desk, Karen's smug little smirk finally cracked. But instead of backing down, she did what she always did. She pushed harder. Because at the next HOA board meeting, she rallied the entire neighborhood against me. She painted me as a threat to their way of life, a dangerous outsider who had to be stopped at any cost. And that meeting, it turned into the ugliest showdown yet. When I first got the notice about the HOA board meeting, I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. Karen had called it an emergency session to address the community's concerns about Daniel Parker's behavior. In other words, it was a public trial, where I was the defendant and Karen was judge, jury, and executioner. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse. When I walked in, the air was thick with tension. Dozens of neighbors packed the folding chairs, whispering and side-eyeing me as I found a seat in the back. At the front, Karen sat at a long table flanked by her board members like a queen on her throne. Richard was right beside her, puffing his chest out like he owned the place. She banged a little wooden gavel. "This meeting will come to order. We are here to discuss the ongoing issues with Mr. Daniel Parker and his non-compliance with HOA standards." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing my temper would only play into her hands. Karen launched into a speech, her voice dripping with false concern. She listed every bogus violation, every false complaint. She talked about noise pollution, environmental damage, and safety hazards. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice for dramatic effect. And most concerning of all, multiple residents have expressed fear for their safety after Mr. Parker allegedly made verbal threats. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could feel eyes boring into me, judgmental and cold. Finally, I stood up. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steady. That's a lie. Every word of it. I've never threatened anyone. The truth is, the HOA, and specifically Karen and Richard, have been harassing me since the day I started building. They vandalized my property, filed false complaints, even set fire to my lumber pile. The room erupted into murmurs. Karen slammed her gavel. "Order! Order! Mr. Parker, you will not make wild accusations without proof." "Proof?" I snapped, pulling a folder from under my arm. "I've got police reports, I've got photos, I've got statements from Deputy Carson himself. You want proof? It's all right here." I held up the folder, and for the first time, Karen's mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw her eyes flicker with something that looked like fear. Richard leaned forward, sneering. "You can't prove anything. Everyone knows you're the one causing trouble. You don't belong here." That set me off. "Doesn't belong here. I bought this land. I've worked my whole life for this. This is my home. And you," I pointed straight at Richard, "you tried to buy it out under me, and when I said no, you and your wife started this whole mess. This isn't about community. It's about control. And Karen's the one pulling the strings." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, to my surprise, someone in the audience spoke up. "Is that true, Karen?" It was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly neighbor who'd lived in the subdivision for decades. She adjusted her glasses, frowning. "Because I've noticed your car parked by his lot late at night, and I saw Richard near there the night of the fire." The room buzzed with whispers again. Karen's face flushed red, but she quickly recovered. "This is nonsense, baseless rumors. Mr. Parker is clearly trying to turn the community against its leadership." But the seed had been planted. For the first time, not everyone was nodding along with her. Some neighbors looked uncertain, some looked angry. I pressed my advantage. "Listen, I know some of you don't like me. I know you've heard things, but all I've ever wanted was to build a home here, the same way you all did once. And I'm not going to be bullied out of it just because I stood up to Karen. If she can do this to me, she can do it to any one of you." The room fell quiet. People exchanged uneasy glances. Karen banged her gavel again, her voice sharp. "Enough. This meeting is adjourned. The board will take appropriate legal action." And just like that, she shut it down. But as I walked out of the clubhouse, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Cracks in her empire. A few neighbors actually patted me on the shoulder, whispering things like, "Hang in there, Daniel," or "She's gone too far this time." For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone. Still, Karen wasn't finished. She stormed out of the clubhouse with Richard on her side, and as she passed me, she leaned in close, her voice a low hiss. "You think you've won something tonight? You haven't seen anything yet. I'll bury you in court." I stood there in the warm Georgia night, her words echoing in my ears. My lawyer had warned me this would get ugly, but I hadn't realized just how ugly until that moment. Because Karen wasn't bluffing. She was about to drag me into the fight of my life. And the next chapter of this nightmare wouldn't play out in the neighborhood. It would play out in a courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. As I walked through the double doors that morning, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Months of harassment, vandalism, threats, and lies, all of it had led to this day. I wasn't alone. My lawyer, Rebecca Hayes, walked beside me, calm and composed in her navy blue suit. She gave me a quick glance and a small nod. "We've got this, Daniel. Just stick to the truth." On the other side of the courtroom, Karen sat stiffly in her seat, dressed to the nines like she was attending a gala instead of a legal hearing. Richard sat beside her, glaring at me as if his stare alone could make me disappear. Their lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive gray suit, shuffled papers with an air of smug confidence. When the judge finally entered and the hearing began, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't Karen's HOA meeting. This wasn't her clubhouse stage where she could gavel me into silence. This was a court of law, and here her smirk didn't carry the same weight. Rebecca opened with a powerful statement. "Your Honor, this case is not just about one man trying to build his home. It's about an HOA that abused its power, harassed a property owner, and went as far as falsifying violations, vandalizing property, and spreading lies to force him out. We will show that the defendants acted maliciously, and we will prove that their actions went beyond their authority." Karen's lawyer fired back with his own speech, painting me as the villain. "Your Honor, Mr. Parker has repeatedly violated community standards, threatened residents, and ignored the authority of the HOA. The board has acted within its rights to protect the neighborhood." I gritted my teeth. The lies sounded so polished, so rehearsed. For a moment doubt crept in. What if the judge believed them? But then it was time for testimony. Rebecca called me first. I took the stand, palms sweaty, voice trembling at first. I told the whole story: the knock on my door, the bogus complaints, the spray-painted walls, the stolen tools, the smashed generator, the fire. I told the judge about Richard shoving me, about Karen's late-night stakeouts, about the fake stop work order nailed to my frame. As I spoke, I saw the judge's brow furrow. He wasn't nodding along with Karen. He was listening to me, really listening. Next, Rebecca called Deputy Carson. He walked up in uniform, steady and firm. His testimony was a turning point. "Yes, Your Honor, I responded to multiple incidents at Mr. Parker's site. I personally warned Mr. Mitchell after a physical altercation. I witnessed Mrs. Mitchell loitering near the site on multiple occasions, and while I can't prove who set the fire, I can say with confidence that Mr. Parker has been the target of ongoing harassment." Karen's lawyer tried to poke holes. "Deputy, did you ever see Mrs. Mitchell commit vandalism? Did you ever see her set fire to lumber?" Carson shook his head. "No, sir, but I saw the intimidation firsthand, and I know harassment when I see it." That carried weight. You could feel the air shift. Then Rebecca pulled out the ace up her sleeve, the stop work order. She held it up for the court to see. "Your Honor, this document was nailed to my client's property. It looks official, but it was not issued by the county. It was drafted and signed by the HOA president, Mrs. Mitchell, in an attempt to illegally halt construction." The judge took the paper, examined it, and his frown deepened. "Mrs. Mitchell, is this your signature?" For the first time, Karen faltered. She hesitated, then said, "I was exercising my authority as HOA president to protect the community." The judge leaned forward. "You have no such authority. This is a misrepresentation of legal power." I'll never forget the look on her face. That smug mask she'd worn for months cracked, and underneath was panic. Rebecca wasn't finished. She called Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who'd spoken up at the HOA meeting. She testified under oath that she'd seen Karen's car parked near my lot late at night and saw Richard lurking the night of the fire. Karen's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Piece by piece, the narrative unraveled. Finally, it was Karen's turn on the stand. She tried to hold her composure, but Rebecca's questions cut deep. "Mrs. Mitchell, did Mr. Parker ever physically threaten you?" She stammered. "Well, not directly, but his presence was aggressive." "Did you call the police and claim he threatened to burn your house down?" Her lips tightened. "Yes, because I felt threatened." "Do you have any evidence of that?" Silence. Richard was no better. When pressed about trying to buy my land, he got defensive. So what? It was a fair offer. He should have taken it. By the end of his testimony, he looked less like a concerned neighbor and more like a bitter bully who didn't get his way. When closing arguments came, Rebecca's words were clear and cutting. "Your Honor, this isn't about community standards. This is about abuse. A small group of individuals used the HOA as their personal weapon to intimidate, harass, and drive out a rightful property owner. If we allow this kind of behavior, then no homeowner in Georgia is safe." The courtroom was silent as the judge scribbled notes. Finally, he spoke. "I have reviewed the evidence, heard the testimony, and considered the arguments. It is clear to this court that the HOA, under Mrs. Mitchell's leadership, acted outside the bounds of its authority and engaged in harassment against Mr. Parker. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff." I exhaled so hard I almost collapsed. The judge wasn't finished. "The HOA is hereby ordered to cease all interference with Mr. Parker's construction. Additionally, damages in the amount of $75,000 are awarded to the plaintiff for losses and distress caused by the defendant's actions." Karen gasped. Richard swore under his breath. Their lawyer looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. As for me, for the first time in months, I felt free. Neighbors who had once whispered behind my back now approached me outside the courthouse. Some apologized, some admitted they'd been scared to speak up against Karen, and some just shook my hand quietly grateful that someone had finally stood up to her. That night, I drove back to my lot. The half-built frame of my dream home stood tall against the setting sun. The smell of sawdust and pine filled the air. For the first time, I didn't feel fear or paranoia when I looked at it. I felt pride. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof that I hadn't given up, that no matter how hard they tried, Karen and Richard couldn't break me. And as I stood there in the quiet Georgia evening, I thought about all the people out there fighting their own battles against unfair HOAs, against bullies who hide behind rules and power. To them, I'd say this: don't let them steal your dream. Stand your ground, because sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to quit. My dream home wasn't finished yet, but after everything I'd been through, one thing was certain: it was finally mine.